Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Ramble in the Jungle. I am Arvind, and as usual, we also have Akash. Hi, Akash.
Hi, Arvind. How are you?
Good, man. Pretty good. So, today we are discussing the book Blink by the popular author Malcolm Gladwell, whose other book, the only other book that I've read is The Outliers, which I'm sure a lot would have also read because I think that's his most popular book. But this is a book that was recommended by Akash. So he has read the book, and I have read the summary of it. Seems pretty interesting, at least from the summary. But one question, though, Akash, before we begin, does this book
Hmm.
have anything to do with the band Blink 182?
uh, no, but not entirely,
Disappointed.
because I can tell you I've heard I think one song of Blink 182, um, and it's that what's that that's what's the name of the song? It's just evading me, right? But I'm pretty sure it's the same song that everybody else has heard, and the phenomenon of remembering just one song
Yes.
immediately and sort of hearing it for maybe 5 seconds on the Sony Walkman of the early 2000s, and immediately liking it, and probably not liking a lot of their other songs or other bands' other songs, is the same phenomenon of Blink, where you make a snap judgment in about 5 seconds into a song, and you formed your whole opinion, like, I love this song, or I love this band, and this is my song right now.
Hmm.
So, to answer your question, it has nothing to do with the band, but the phenomenon described in the book and the phenomenon that I at least experienced with that Blink 182 song is the same.
Okay. So this book, it isn't about Blink 182. So it is about what you said, snap judgments. So is I'm not sure if you have read the other book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which also
Yep,
discusses a
Daniel
similar.
Kahneman.
Yes, it also discusses a similar idea where there's a fast brain and a slow brain. Is the idea discussed by Malcolm Gladwell similar to the idea discussed by Daniel Kahneman?
So Kahneman makes a differentiation. He says there's a fast and slow brain.
Hmm?
Gladwell goes in specifically studying the fast brain in situations where it has to think fast,
Hmm.
and those fast sort of thoughts, judgments, actions are context driven. They're always context driven. So um, we probably have a strong context about stuff like cycling, so we can identify a cycle in 5 seconds, whether it's good, bad, or what the problem is. Another person who's sort of, let's say, he or she is very adept at art, has tremendous context with art,
Hmm.
and can identify a painting based on the history, the sculpture, the whatever, right? Immediately, and make a judgment. So again, this was based on several scenarios where only how Kahneman describes the fast brain is at play, but this fast brain has a tremendous amount of context and tremendous amount of historical understanding to be able to make those snap judgments.
Okay. So is it similar to the thing that we were doing at races when we used to run, when we just look at people and just say that, this person is a 5K
Oh,
person,
the 5K guy is a
10K
10K
guy.
guy. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much
Okay.
the same thing.
Yeah. So my question is how, I mean, what does he discuss in the book, or what does he say in the book about this? Does he say that these judgments are often accurate, or is it something that humans are tend to do but are always wrong about it? What does he say about that specifically?
So he says very clearly, he starts out the book by saying that we should, even in the most difficult of times, even when confronted with a lot of even if one decision is going to lead to a lot of sort of sub decisions where you take one path and it leads you down a road,
Hmm.
you should ideally trust your instincts. You should
Okay.
ideally trust those, that basic instinct that you have, that and if it just comes to you, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? And you have that little feeling in your gut, as people say,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, this doesn't feel right to me, man. That's more often than not correct.
Hmm.
So take that decision. And he explains this through several stories, and says that in many ways we're often swayed by others. In many ways we're nudged, as in the book by Cass Sunstein, I think.
No, Richard Thaler.
Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein.
Yes, yes.
Um, the nudge phenomenon is very true. So I think we've spoken about two very similar books,
Hmm.
which lead to the same sort of feeling, where nudge is when something nudges you into a direction, even though you aren't specifically going there, but you're made to go there. um, you have a fast brain and slow brain, how Kahneman describes. And Blink sort of explains that yes, you can be nudged. Yes, you have a fast brain. You should trust both in certain situations when you have the context too.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and I think uh, that is something that most of us do, right? We sort of always rely on our instincts. We know our instincts are most of the times right. So when faced with a difficult decision, we might think all about it for days on end. But in the end, I think uh, what actually, at least what I've experienced, is that instinct always takes over. I'm not saying that it's always the right decision, but it takes over uh, to, like, the immediate instinct, and you take the action. So, and I think it's similar to the idea of inspiration. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm,
but inspiration. When you look at something, like, for example, an inspiring ad or whatever, when you see an inspiring thing, uh, you're inspired to do something, and if you don't do that in the immediate, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, I mean, that's for me, but maybe it's longer for others. You never do that later on, and that's one thing that I've noticed. Do you think that is similar to what uh, Gladwell describes in the book about instinct?
yeah, it is. And I would say 5 to 10 minutes would probably be a little too much. At least that's what
Okay.
Gladwell indicates,
Okay.
right? So he says that you can discern a lot about something in the first 2 seconds,
Hmm.
and it doesn't have to be um, 2 seconds of intense thinking. It's just like if something is put in front of you with some amount of context and pulled out, you have enough judgment in order to you have enough pre-judgment in order to make a judgment, right? So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
I got this book from a friend
Hmm.
who uh, and I didn't know I was learning a valuable lesson that the book would teach me. I was in his house where I was helping him with a little bit of project at work or something,
Hmm.
and he basically told me that I had to give him a book, and he said, "Okay, do you want a book in exchange?" I said, "What book do you have?" He just put Blink in because he said, "I have Blink. I'll put it in front of me. I'll put it in your bag." I was wearing my bag. I was on the way out, and I didn't see it until I got home. And I pulled it out, and immediately in the first 2 seconds, I thought that, oh, I should read this. And there's nothing else. I didn't think about buying it. I didn't buy it. I borrowed it from a friend. I didn't want to read it. I had no plans of reading it. I happened to have finished a book on in the same week, so I needed something to read, and this
Hmm.
just fell in my lap. And it was a complete coincidence that I caught it. And I thought that, okay, this seems interesting. And as I continued to read, I sort of replayed that moment and thought that, it's the same circumstance that gave me the book. Maybe I was just, I was supposed to read it, and I did, and it was a wonderful read. So to answer again your question, there's a lot that can happen in 2 seconds if you have enough prejudgment in order to make a post judgment,
Hmm.
and that is what we should ideally rely on. Again, if we have had a tremendous amount of experience, he
Hmm.
gives stories of of medical researchers who can discern whether a person who has just come into the emergency ward is actually having a fatal heart attack or not. He
Hmm.
has used the same example of an experienced military commander who has a deficient amount of troops, who is in a simulation game with another commander who has a surplus of troops. And since he has understood the situation, has been in those situations multiple times, he can make tremendous amount of judgments which turn out to be right because he has had experiences, right? So even if it's in a crunch situation like in an emergency ward or on the battlefield or anywhere else, he's given the situation of police officers in high stakes encounters as well. um, because these people have a tremendous amount of experience in these fields, they can discern a lot about things in the first, say, 2 to 5 seconds. And most of the time, I mean, maybe not all of the time, but most of the time they are correct.
Hmm. Interesting. So even first impressions matter, not only when you are judging others, but also when you are being judged yourself. So I think you have to judge the book by its cover. And we often do that,
Exactly.
right? We often do that as
And
well.
that is a theory that he describes as the theory of thin slicing,
Okay.
where you take a particular situation, and because you haven't sort of you've just entered into the situation, you've just met a person, or you've just seen the book, you
Hmm.
don't have a lot of slices to work with, so to speak. And
Oh,
slices here are slices of memory, right? um, Memory with respect to the book, memory with respect to the person, memory with respect to the situation. So what you end up doing is you end up thin slicing. You end up judging based on a short amount of exposure. And what thin slicing is the ability of the unconscious or of our unconscious to find patterns in situations and behavior based on very, very, very narrow slices of experience,
hmm.
right? And in any situation, the ratio of time to negative emotion, sorry, the ratio of positive to negative emotion in any encounter in order to make a good judgment should be 5:1. Meaning
Okay.
that if I've been in a situation where I have had 6 experiences, 5 of them bad, 1 of them good, then my next experience with that is uh, prejudged to be positive. Meaning that if I've gone for,
Okay.
say, 6 races, let's say running races, and I've had 5 good experiences, one in which I ate biryani the previous night and ended up puking on the side of the road, like someone did. Um, I would be wary of the next week's run because I know that I wouldn't be wary because 5 times I did right and 1 time I did wrong.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
positive experiences drive more positive experiences. That's true. But you have to maintain a ratio of, say, 5:1 in order to have that good ability to thin slice.
Okay, another interesting idea. But I mean, yeah, this book is about that instinctual thinking. But what about those times when we, think through for days and then make a decision? Are those something we need to do, or should we solely rely on our instincts at all times? What does he say about that? And what are your
So
thoughts on that? Yeah.
he differentiates very clearly between, say, straightforward decisions, whether it's a yes or a no, whether it's there's not a lot of thinking going on. So, for instance, um, let's paint a scenario, right? If it's a straightforward decision, you have 2 choices. Um, let's say you have to go to attend a test, an exam, or you have to just cover and say that I'm not going to do it, man, it's too difficult, and I can bear the consequences of it. That's a straightforward decision. You should ideally go and do it,
Hmm.
right? So that on straightforward decisions, on straightforward decisions, deliberate analysis is the best, where we break down variables, look at pro and cons, we see what will happen, we look at best case scenarios, we look at worst case scenarios, we do a sort of drawn out forward thinking test, right?
Hmm.
What will happen if I do this? What will happen if I do that? Right?
Hmm.
Those sorts of deliberate analysis are best. That would be apt when deciding a career, deciding a major, deciding a person who you want to get married to, stuff like that. Deliberate analysis is important,
Hmm.
right? But when questions of analysis and personal choice start to get complicated, and when we have to juggle many variables, right, then our unconscious thought process might be superior. Now, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of what of an experiment that was conducted. So, a couple of, I think, Dutch researchers gave sort of had four examples of cars with with very few variables. I think they played around with three variables. They
Hmm.
played around with mileage. They played around with handling. They played around with trunk space, or dicky space as we call it here, and force and sound system, right? Four very simple variables, not enough to judge a car, completely hypothetical. They weren't giving a model, they weren't giving a manufacturer, they weren't giving anything. They said that car A has XYZ of these characteristics, car B, C, D has a different mix of these characteristics.
Hmm.
Now, you have to, and obviously, there is one best and one worst among the four, right? So you have a 25% chance of getting the best and 25% chance of getting the worst. Very simple test. Um, and they tried this test with two sets of people, um, and they wanted to find which set of people actually get the answer right, because at the end of the day there is one right answer, there is one right car with the best mix of, of features.
Hmm.
um, the difference between the two sets is one set got the information and then had to do their choosing immediately after, right? So it was, I got my information, do the choosing. There was no gap between. Second one had to solve a set of anagrams. Once they got their choices, they had to solve a bunch of anagrams, and then they had to sort of discern their choices.
Okay.
Um, and they had to, and that was mainly a distraction, right? And after the 4 minute interval, he posed them he posed to them the same question. He posed to them, which one would you choose? And what happened was that what happened was that 20% of the people who were distracted, 20% of the people who weren't distracted, the first group, the one who did it straightforward, got the answer correct,
Oh,
20%,
okay.
whereas 60% in the other group got the answer correct. Meaning that if you are more distracted with an arbitrary choice, with with limited four variables, you are more likely to get the answer correct because you rely on your unconscious to make the decision. They all made snap judgments, they all were forced into thinking, and they all didn't have enough information to rely on because their mind was still distracted with the anagram that they just saw.
Oh, okay. So when plagued with choices, our instinct doesn't work that well, or uh, what does that mean? Does that mean that, when there are less number of choices, we make like our instincts are better, or is that when there are more number of choices, our
Say,
instincts are bad?
if you have a lot of information that you do very clearly understand, let's look at it this way. If you were a car fanatic, and this was if these four choices were very model dependent, right? Like I gave you four different cars,
Yes.
four sound systems, four engine types, four
Mhm.
fuel types, stuff like that. And you could think through each of them. You think that, oh, and then we gave you, oh, I'm in Bangalore and the roads are such and such, fuel prices are such and such, and you do these deep analysis.
Hmm.
That might be good because you might be adept at doing that.
Hmm.
But if I were to pull you out and say that this is it's a flat choice, make the decision immediately, you would still be able to do that, right? You might
Okay.
take less time, but you still be able to do that. A person who isn't a car fanatic, right, someone who doesn't understand these variables as complicated as you do, um, could also make the decision, and could also possibly make the decision, if there was one right decision, could also make that right decision a lot faster than you, because they are relying on their snap judgment.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. Very. So, what I'm thinking is in terms of people, which we do make judgments even before we know that person. We just make judgments based on their physical appearance, right? And you can think through the whole thing about what kind of books they're into, what kind of music they're into, and all those long conversations. But I think you've made your decision as soon as you met them, as soon as you've seen their faces, right?
Right.
And essentially, so this is another interesting thing that I read. It's about babies, very young born babies, uh, observing these attractive people's faces. So I'm getting, I might be, so what it is basically, if a baby stares at your face for a longer period of time, I mean, they only stare at faces that are attractive for a longer period of time because human brain enjoys symmetry and pattern. So an attractive face is one with sort of a good symmetry. So our human brain sort of enjoys that. So babies stare into these attractive faces. So what I'm basically saying is, if any baby stares at you for a long period of time, then you are an attractive man or woman. uh, so yeah, I think those initial things do make sort of uh, a long-lasting impression on us. But my next question is in terms of prejudice and in terms of our own, going back to our last episode,
Bias.
conditioning, yeah, bias. Because we are conditioned based on our religion, family, and all those things. How does that play into our decision making? Like, how important is that factor when we are making decisions? Any
That
comments
is
on that in the book?
incredibly
Yeah.
that is incredibly important. And we have perceptions of people based on the way they look. Like, oh, this guy must be a leader, right? He looks like a leader. Or that guy, oh, he's so timid, man. He can't do anything. Or oh, she looks sporty. Or you look at someone who's very argumentative, and lots of people say, oh yeah, that guy must be a lawyer. Stuff like that. So we have these snap judgments that we make, and that more often than not is based on truth. But in this chapter, he explains it very clearly and comically through Warren Harding, who's one of the presidents of the United States of America. And he was he was not presidential, so to speak. And he was just this handsome, rich, uh, handsome man, right? Tall, dark, handsome man, sort of presidential types. And in, I think, 1899, in 1899, or in at least the late 1900s, uh, the Republican sort of campaign was deadlocked between, let's see here, I'm not sure who exactly it was. He didn't
That
detail it
doesn't
in the
matter.
book, but
Yeah.
that doesn't matter right now. It's a
Yeah.
century later, but it was deadlocked, and Harding came in sixth out of six candidates, right? And this was to determine who would go on to the general election.
Hmm.
And since it was deadlocked, the party couldn't decide who to take between candidate number one and candidate number two. And they all decided that we need to look at an alternative, because if we pick one of the two, then
Hmm.
at the general election, since our own sort of party is divided, we might not all vote for one guy.
Hmm.
So we should ideally pick someone who is middle ground, so to speak. Right? So our entire voter base, our entire party can vote for at least one person. And they picked Warren Harding simply because, and the book reads, he was a man who radiated common sense and dignity, and all that was presidential. He was a man that looked presidential. He was a man that looked like he could lead, but could he actually? Um, not entirely, right? Harding served 2 years before dying unexpectedly of a stroke. He was, as most historians agree, one of the worst presidents in American history. But the only reason he sort of got elevated into that position was because he looked the part. Right? A
Hmm.
lot of people look the part, and a lot of people look the part because we allow them to look the part. It's our eyes that do the biased
Discerning.
thinking,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So this is the dark side of thin slicing, as we explained earlier. And a way to test this out is, there's a test called the IAT, the Implicit Association Test. It's made by researchers at Harvard, and you can go on there. I think it's still available for the public. I remember I tried it a few years ago. But it's basically in order to see if you have an implicit bias. So what they do is they give you um, um, people and and figures that are associated with either people or countries, or determining in order to determine, do you have a bias for or against a country, or do you have a bias for or against a type of people, whether it's based on a race, based on a religion, based on gender, based on whatever, right? It might not be good or bad. It just might be how your conditions, for instance, in the olden times, we were conditioned in order to think that um, men work, women are at home. So one of the tests that is detailed in the book is you're given a bunch of names,
Hmm.
very clearly differentiated between male and female, and you have to tick which the male name, which the female name, which seems like a pretty straightforward task. Then you're given male and female names, and also words that are associated with a career and words that are associated with family. For instance, career words can be entrepreneur, merchant, capitalist, corporation, and family words can be siblings, home, food, dinner, lunch. Um, and you're supposed to tick which one falls into which. And initially, it's easy because if male and career is under one category, and you have to tick all on the left, for instance, and female and family is on the right, it's easier for you to tick because that's how you're conditioned. But when the career and family are switched, and when it's male and family
Hmm.
and female and career, it takes a lot more time in order to do this, because we are conditioned in order to think in this particular way, right? And a way for us to sort of try this out is us, as in us Indians, in order to try it out, because I mean, I have, it might have changed, is I took a test of to see if I have an implicit bias against our neighbor Pakistan, right? So what essentially the test was very simple, right? You have to pick, if some image was thrown in front of you, you have to just pick if it is good or bad. That's it. And you have to pick good or bad by pressing E and I, like the letter E and I on your keyboard.
Hmm.
um, and words and figures associated with Pakistan was very clearly the word Pakistan, the rupee, the Pakistan rupee note, um, the cities in Pakistan, Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, and stuff like that, right? Like all of these associations, the Pakistani cricket team, stuff like that. Anything that immediately you can think of that is Pakistan, right? And you are given other similar symbols and people's faces that are associated with India, right? Um, and you have to, and these are presented to you in a 2 second interval. So in 2 seconds, you decide good or bad, good or bad, good or bad, good or bad, and that goes on for I think 2 minutes or 3 minutes or so. And
Hmm.
by the end of it, I figured out that I have a bias against Pakistan, right? Which is true because I've been like conditioned in a way, because we live in the society, and
Yes.
and we are made to think that for good or bad, right? We're not going to comment on that. The neighbor to our left is our neighbor to our west is our enemy, right?
Hmm.
And that this is true for tests like white versus black, male versus female, Israel versus Palestine, stuff like that. Like the most touchy topics that you can think of that you don't feel like you have a bias for. So
Hmm.
we will link the test in the show notes. And if
Hmm.
you guys want to sort of get it, it's I think implicit.harvard.edu. But anyway, we'll link the test in the show notes, because everybody should sort of try it out and see what kind of biases they have, because we all do, and based on that we make what Malcolm Gladwell calls the Warren Harding error, by judging someone based on their cover.
Hmm. But my okay, what I'm thinking is that bias. How often is that bias uh, very bad? Like, how often does it lead to us making a bad decision, or how often does it has it sort of led us in the wrong way? Because every time, okay, whatever bias you may have, like even the example that you gave of a man looking presidential, if a man looks presidential, half the job is done, right? I mean, there have certainly been anomalies, but that's one other thing, right? If you look at, for example, an attractive person, uh, you immediately sort of just make a judgment thinking they are good because of how they've kept their body, for example, you know, how they maintain their body, which shows that, I mean, all these things happen in the background, but it happens very quickly. So I'm not really sure if, I mean, certainly we have biases, but I'm not really sure if those biases, or whatever you may call them, thought bubble or confirmation bias or whatever, you I don't really think it's such a bad thing when you're making a decision. Certainly, I mean, you need to be cognizant of the fact that you are sort of prejudiced in your decision making. But I mean, everybody is, and most of the times, I mean, at least for me, that's worked out well. Whatever, like, going back to the example of the attractive people kind of a thing. So they sort of look after themselves, and which shows that they have certain um, like the word discipline comes into mind, and all those things come into mind, right? So I necessarily don't think it's such a bad thing. What do you think about that? Do you think I know what Malcolm Gladwell has said. I mean, that's what you described, but what are your thoughts on that specifically?
I think we as human beings look for patterns, and
Yes.
patterns are based on data, and data is based on personal experiences. And what we do is we have an internal spreadsheet where we take data and we tag it into certain sort of columns and rows on our spreadsheet. And if we have a future situation that arises based on a similar experience, then we go back to that data and the conclusions that that data gave us, and we immediately think that this is the likely conclusion, and that might be implicit bias, but that's based on experiences, so it is fine.
Hmm.
Right, personally I think it is fine, that's all right.
Yeah.
An example can be something like, and again, this might sound very incorrect to certain people, but if you have situations where, let's look at a simple situation, right? Let's look at a situation where um, okay, how about this is something that we've both experienced, right? If we're riding on a cycle down a road, and we see a dog at the corner, right? We immediately have an instinct, at least you and I, that we have to go faster and swerve slightly away from that dog, because we know that he might or she might turn around and chase us or chase the wheel, right?
Yeah,
For whatever
definitely.
reason, right? So we have that bias because we have been in situations where a dog has very violently come after us for no I don't
Hmm.
know. I mean, maybe they've smelt our tire, some other dog peed on it, territory dominance, whatever, right? Um, but that has scared us, obviously. Right? That's a fearful thing when you're on a cycle going pretty quickly
Yeah.
and without balance, and something's chasing you with sharp teeth and rabies. So we swerve away, right? So it's not necessary that every dog has that
Hmm.
feeling instinct, but it is certainly true that we as riders, in order to be safe, swerve away, go faster, are very conscious about these situations, and do a lot of sort of safety checks before that. So we know before approaching it that, hey, we have to be safe, right? And now you can change dog in cycling with anything you want. You can change uh, man and rob, you can change man and riot, woman and riot, type of people, and they're more likely to riot. um, you can change judgment and theft and whatever, right? And that is, in my opinion, it's fine. Everybody has an implicit bias. I think that implicit bias is a personal, because that's why they're implicit, and they're based on personal experiences, which we log on a spreadsheet like database entries, right?
Hmm.
Time, day, person, height, we put everything. We put height, we put skin color, we put clothes, we put everything, and therefore we make the judgment. Therefore we look at someone who's wearing like a swanky shirt and like, oh, that guy must be XYZ, you know.
Hmm.
Now, or you look at someone who's very neatly dressed, right? Like
Hmm.
clean shaven, short hair, nice, build, uh, uh, tie, suspender sort of type thing, and he's like, okay, you're XYZ in my book, right? So I think prejudging people is fine if it is based on implicit personal experiences based on a database entry.
Yeah, and also talks about this mimetic desire. which is something that is described by this this I don't know if he's a philosopher, but his name is Rene Girard, and he had this theory called the mimetic theory, which basically sort of states that human desires something not because of sometimes because of the environment, but mainly they desire it because other people desire it. We sort of copy each other, we sort of imitate each other. So if you are desiring, um, I don't know, to get a brand new cycle, I also desire that, not because that thing is scarce or anything. It's mainly because I'm imitating you, and that's sort of true to all the things we see in our nature. When the basic needs are met, like uh, sleeping, eating, having a shelter, um, the next sort of desires that we have, it's all imitations, right? And that is very, very true in terms of the things that we desire and the things uh, that we are thinking about, our biases. We have these biases, like you said, because we've sort of been conditioned as a whole nation, going back to the example of Pakistan, to sort of treat them as our enemy, right? So yeah, a lot of things play in, but how do we uh, go away from this? How do we go away from this prejudice, this bias, or should we even go away from this? What does Malcolm Gladwell have to say in the book?
So I think biases are innate, and you shouldn't really force yourself in order to not think about them.
Hmm?
And I think it's good. It might be incorrect to say it's good to have biases, but in order to have biases, you have to think, right? And in order to think, you have to be free, you have to be aware, you have to be log information, you have to be understanding. It's fine, right? Personally, I feel like there's nothing wrong with having a bias. If it's a bias based on data, if it's a bias based on understanding, if it's a bias based on personal experiences, if you have a bias that is just based on nothing, right? That would be prejudice. And that is something that we should try to correct. But that correction happens with the person, not with someone forcing the person in order to think. Because, I mean, if I put a gun to your head, you are thinking what I want you to think,
Yes,
right?
that's
So
true.
there is no way I can get you to think, force you to think in a particular way without putting a gun to your head.
Yeah.
So I think biases are good, and people who sort of rave on about them and say that you can't be biased, man, you can't be this, man. They want you to think according to them, and that is not possible. That is never possible. At least for me, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, and even the idea that when people say that, they don't judge people, I just think these people are crazy, man. I mean, even
Yeah,
I would
man,
say
we're
that.
made to.
No,
If
even I would say that, before, but then when I deeply thought about it, there's no way that you can go around not judging people.
I
Uh,
don't judge people, man.
yeah, I'm the same.
You can't do that. I mean, if you don't judge people, then you're not a thinker. Like you don't think about anything. You're just a robot going
But
through life, and you're like, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do this, I'll do that. You can't do that.
one interesting thing, which Naval Ravikant, I remember a discussion in a podcast or somewhere, was that he calls this conscious meditation. So what he does is, obviously he knows that he can't not judge things and people in his environment, but what he tries to limit is the number of times he does that. So he's consciously, when he's walking down the street or he's sitting or talking to people, definitely those thoughts come up. Like when you're talking to someone, it's like, oh God, this his breath stinks, or this guy is terrible. All those things comes into your head. But what he says is, if you're conscious about it, you do that less and less. Um, and that is something we can aspire to, because all these judgments, they may be good, the instinctual judgments, like they may be helping you, but too much is causing a lot of chaos in your head, man. And on the long run, if you really want peace, you need to get that chattering mind to calm down, right? And that is, I think he was talking in that sense rather than the what we are discussing. But yeah, I think that also makes sense. So I think we've discussed quite a bit, and we discussed the main idea of the book, which is, instincts matter, but it also, and we do that quite a lot of times. Uh, One last thing is that, is there anything that you missed out? Or do you think any big idea that you wanted from the book that you wanted to put out there for the listeners? Or do you think
I
that
think
you covered it all?
lastly, I would say that there's one thing that really caught my eye was that there's a theory of the locked door,
Okay.
which is which is what goes on behind a locked door is something within our mind. The locked door within our mind is something that we can't really comprehend. It has a lot of snap judgments. It has a lot of rapid cognition. A lot of what we think is fine, um, but it might not be the same. It might not be fine. We might be being primed, right? And we might be being primed in order to think. And this goes back into what biases are. Um, what we think might be someone else doing the thinking for us. An example can be something like very sort of, just to conclude, one of the experiments that was conducted in the book by researchers whom Gladwell details in the book is they take a group of 5 to 10 people. They give them two sets of words. One is polite sounding words, right? Polite, nice, enjoy, slow, smooth, calm, sort of words like that. And then you give them words that are fairly aggressive, negative, right? Like shout, reach, scream, aggressive, stuff like that. Um, and they just give them those words that are jumbled in a paragraph. So the rest of the words in the paragraph are fairly vanilla words, right? You can't really discern positive and negative from them. And the rest of the words are either positive or negative. Positive being calm, sort of very well-natured, good-natured words, and the other being very aggressive words. And they told them that, okay, your only job in this particular experiment is to read these words. And once you've read it, once you've sort of, read it over and over again, and go to the person over there. This seemed like an administrative task. Go to the person over there at the reception and ask him or her, what is my next task? Right? That's it. That's all you have to do. The person over there, the receptionist, was usually engaged in certain activity, right? Just talking on the phone, talking to a colleague, or typing an email or stuff like that. And when they were approached by the person who was taking the test, they would act like they're really busy. So what the person would do is they would either wait or they would immediately cut and be like, hey, I need to know what the next task is. Can you please let me know? Right. So you either had to be polite and sort of wait there, or you had to be slightly negative and say that, hey, can you tell me what I need to do? Sort of cut them off while they're talking to a friend or in the middle of something. The people that were primed with the polite words took about 5 to 10 minutes. They just stood there in silence, waiting for the person to finish their work. And the people who were who were primed with the negative words immediately cut them. Right now, within a few minutes, they cut them and they said that, hey, I need to know what I need to do next. So please let me know so that I can go. That is based on priming. We're all being primed somewhere or the other. And when we're being primed, we have to think about it in a way where we're outside the locked door, right? Our mind is working outside the locked door, where we are sort of made to do something that we don't generally want to do, but it's something that we're forced to do. So with that, we just sort of want to, with that example, let's just conclude this podcast.
Yes.
And the one thing that you should take away, or I hope that you take away from this, is there's the power of thinking without thinking. There is a lot to be thought without actually thinking, and more often than not, you should trust it. But you should always know when you're being primed, and you should always not fear your implicit bias, because we all have it.
Mm. Okay. I think that's a great way to end, a great concluding sentence. We will see you next week again on the same thing, a new book with the same thing. So keep rambling and take care.